Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 17th of December. It isn't, it's the 7th. How did I do that?
Not sure.
We'll start
Wishful
again.
thinking, perhaps.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 7th of December 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, we're kicking off with Queen Elizabeth.
Well, indeed, because Queen Elizabeth is commissioning Queen Elizabeth today, apparently. Well, she may have already done it by now. So this is, of course, the first of the new 65,000-ton, £3.1 billion aircraft carriers, which don't have any aircraft. Well, these guys here performing in the ceremony very well.
Looking very smart, as always.
Listen to the if you listen to the music, it's extremely well played. They're marching very well, but of course they're being sold a pup, really, because there are no aircraft for this aircraft carrier at this point in time. As we know, it was went through its naming ceremony a few weeks ago in Scotland with the Duchess of Cornwall naming the ship, and today Queen Elizabeth, who, if you see the photograph, she was wearing a particularly intense shade of purple, is commissioning it. But what did the BBC have to say? Well, here we go. We have a giant cake of the ship, and it does have aircraft, Brian. So that's one thing. That's good.
This is really terrible. What's going on, Mike? Because all those young men and women who are working so hard, dedicated within the military, being utterly betrayed. They've no idea about what's taking place around them. But of course, the government is drastically cutting Britain's military. So that aircraft carrier, or the two aircraft carriers, don't have the escorts capable of providing them with the defence they need. It isn't just a question of putting an aircraft carrier to sea on its own. It's got to have the support of other ships and submarines around it. That support doesn't exist. And they use the Royal Marine Band for the ceremony, whilst the government, of course, is stabbing the Royal Marines in the back once again by looking to cut their numbers further and to sell off our amphibious capability. And I think you mentioned that one of the ships, Ocean, was going to Brazil.
It's going to Brazil. It's been sold, I think, for 50 million. But of course, they're getting rid of the amphibious capability, and we're going to borrow ships from the French.
Are we going to borrow ships from the French? We are going to be told, well, we can only work fully integrated with the EU military forces. So this is a complete lie by the government over Brexit. It's treason upon the nation in that the government has cut our defences to the point where we cannot defend ourselves. That is treason, or at least high treason. And those young men and women simply being used as props in this huge political agenda. I think it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Well,
pretty cynical. So, UK Defence Journal, pretty sensitive about this issue of the aircraft. So Stephen Isle tweeted out to them today, impressive. But which idiot forgot to order the aircraft for this aircraft carrier? UK Defence Journal always jumps on any such comment. They said no one. They go on board when the carrier is ready for them.
Well, that statement is correct, but of course it's a smokescreen, Mike,
but
because there are no aircraft.
Well, exactly, it's not correct because will the aircraft be ready? When the ship is ready, will the aircraft be ready? I don't think they will.
Yeah.
We'll come on to that in a second. But a couple of weeks ago, UK Defence Journal was asking what next for HMS Queen Elizabeth, and there we have the image of it with the empty deck. And so answers on a postcard, I think. What do you think the empty deck could be used for while we're waiting for the F-35s to come through?
And we've no idea whether this aircraft is going to be capable, whether it's going to be there in any numbers to make this carrier worthwhile. We've just got the jam tomorrow promise of the F-35B order.
Or possibly F-35As, so there may not even be enough F-35Bs to fulfill the requirement for the ship. But Japanese television noting that the F-35A itself seems to be falling apart in mid-air, Brian, with sections falling off it during normal training drills. So, okay, this was a piece of, I don't know what, cladding from the outside of the
engine
nacelle, exactly. But what falls off next?
Well, we've already had massive corrosion problems with this aircraft. We've had engine fires. We've had structural problems with the airframes. We've had the oxygen problem, of course, and the key point is that once this aircraft is in service, that is a whole raft of British skills and capability in our own aircraft industry absolutely wiped out. And that, of course, is the agenda by this government.
But we don't need to worry, because apparently, according to Defence One, a newly revealed experiment, this experiment actually happened a couple of years ago, but it's just been announced that it took place. It shows that the F-35 could help intercept North Korean intercontinental ballistic missiles, because apparently this aircraft is so bristling with sensors that it could be used to shoot down North Korean ICBMs. So we should be able to sleep safely in our beds then.
Should.
Yes.
Or not. Well, at the moment, reputation of the Royal Navy is hanging somewhat in the balance. The trial of Charles Howeson is continuing at the moment. This has been quite widely reported across mainstream and local media, although is there a difference? We'll be coming on to that a little later in the news. But in recent days, a number of people have been brought forward to speak up for Mr. Howeson. We've listed some at the top: family, friends, his electrician, a lord, members of parliament. They've all been telling the jury that Howeson is a very respectable man of integrity. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the jury finally make of this trial. Of course, it was moved to Bristol because the claim was that he couldn't get a fair trial in Plymouth because he was too well known. But as the trial progresses, we see that people from that immense circle of friends and acquaintances are brought in for the defence. So very, very interesting trial, and it's going to be an extremely interesting decision by that jury.
Now, yesterday we saw a man in court who was accused of having plotted to blow up the gates at the end of Downing Street, and then in the ensuing chaos, to attempt to stab Theresa May. Today, the news is that another terrorist suspect is in court, and apparently he urged jihadists to kill Prince George. So, Brian, I wonder how far this has to go. I mean, it's speechless, because you know how far do these stories, how extreme do these stories have to become before people sort of say it's enough?
Well, I think people can keep saying it's enough, but until we get to the heart of the matter, that this is a mixture of truth, spin, and government propaganda in order to achieve an agenda. And the agenda is fear. The population is to be kept in a permanent state of fear that we are going to be murdered in our beds by these jihadis. And the jihadis are so powerful, of course, they can bring down buildings in the States from their caves in Afghanistan, or they can be running amok to conquer the Middle East. But not to worry, because our new Defence Secretary says that we're going to kill them. Let's have a look at this. This is from The Guardian. British ISIS fighters should be hunted down and killed, says the Defence Secretary. He said a dead terrorist can't cause any harm to Britain. Britons who've fought for Islamic State abroad should be hunted down and killed. I do not believe that any terrorist, whether they come from this country or any other, should ever be allowed back into this country. We should do everything we can to destroy and eliminate that threat. So what was this man known as in Westminster? The baby-faced assassin, or
yes,
something like that. Keeps a tarantula or a big spider. Tory chief whip. So this is the man that knows all the dirt. And what's he involved in? Killing.
Well, we should just say that, of course, we're not defending people that have been fighting for Islamic State at all, but this is extrajudicial killing, and that is somewhat different. I mean, if you're going to take this stand where people in the Middle East go over there to fight and kill, and our response to that is to kill, then are we any different to what they have done?
Well, this is the key point. This is a key point. Let's bring in this man, because he's the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. He's quoted in that article, so it's Max Hill QC. Actually, the government appoints the independent reviewer, but you understand how the system works there, Mike.
Absolutely.
What does he have to say? Well, he says we've got to make sure that as they splinter and as they disperse across Iraq and Syria and other areas, we continue to hunt them down make sure there's no safe space for them, that they can't go on to other countries preaching their hate, preaching their cult of death. Then in brackets, I've got a statement that actually came before that quote, and what was said was more than 800 UK citizens are thought to have gone to fight for ISIS in Iraq and Syria, including teenagers, women and young families. So I did wonder whether Mr. Hill was suggesting that all of those people should be hunted down, including the women and young families, but it's a bit ambiguous in the Guardian report, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But let's really look at what Gavin Williams is saying. Williamson is saying, this is your point, Mike. He's saying, well, we don't need evidence, we don't need trials, we don't need justice or judgment. We should just kill them all.
So my question, Brian, is if we funded ISIS, which we seem to have done, what is this actually about? Is this about making sure that terrorists don't come back to this country to maim and kill, or is this about making sure that anybody that was involved in ISIS in Syria on the receiving end of UK Foreign Office and Department for International Development money can't come back to talk about it?
In that dead men tell no tales. Well, as always, Mike, you're straight into the subject matter here. Let's just bring our old friend Michael Fallon back on screen, because of course a little while ago he was saying exactly the same thing. We need to kill them. Let's kill them all. Fascinating man, former Minister for War, as we like to call them, rather than Defence Secretary. But his expertise was in children's nurseries. Of course, British military ripped apart while he was in post. But 1 minute he's looking after little children in nurseries. That's his professional expertise. But the rest of it is kill them, kill them. So you were absolutely right, and I've put quite a lot of detail on screen here because I think it's worthwhile. But here's the headline. This is going back in 2011. Libyan terror suspect put in charge of guarding David Cameron on 2011 Tripoli visit. So we've got a Libyan terror suspect who was imprisoned in UK, was put in charge of guarding David Cameron. It said that Mr. Cameron, who was then Prime Minister, visited Tripoli along with French President Sarkozy in September 2011. The security was provided by the Libyan national previously regarded as a terror suspect in the UK. The man's identity was protected by the British legal system. He was given the identifying letter M in court cases after being detained in Belmarsh jail as a suspected terrorist in the wake of the 9/11 attacks in the US. M was a prominent leader in the Libyan Islamic fighting group LIFG, a banned terror organisation of which Abdi's father was also a prominent supporter. LIFG was accused of strong links to Al-Qaeda. So we're going to kill them all, except where the British government has actually conveniently been using the terrorists to foment its own wars in Libya and elsewhere. And if necessary, we're happy to have those terrorists protect British Prime Ministers such as David Cameron.
Well, that's interesting because the BBC used terrorists to protect them when they were in Syria.
Indeed they did.
That's a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence. We're going to encourage people to have a look at the UK Column website. This is one of the news editions that covered this subject from the 4th of December. So if you'd like to know more on how the British government funds terror, have a look at that particular news edition. Where do we go?
Well, Israel. So many people were waiting with bated breath for what Theresa May might say about Donald Trump's decision to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel, or at least to approve that, to suggest that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That statement finally came out late yesterday. She said, "We disagree with the US decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem and recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital before a final status agreement. We believe it is unhelpful in terms of prospects for peace in the region. The British embassy to Israel is based in Tel Aviv, and we have no plans to move it. Our position on the status of Jerusalem is clear and long-standing. It should be determined in a negotiated settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and Jerusalem should ultimately be the shared capital of the Israeli and Palestinian states. In line with the relevant Security Council resolutions, we regard East Jerusalem as part of the occupied Palestinian territories. We share Donald Trump's desire to bring an end to this conflict. We welcome his commitment today to a two-state solution negotiated between the parties, and note the importance of his clear acknowledgement that the final status of Jerusalem, including the sovereign boundaries within the city, must be subject to negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Well, as most people will probably be aware, Benjamin Netanyahu is now attempting to persuade lots of other global leaders to back up Donald Trump and support this decision. But there's been a lot of discussion about, what Trump was thinking about when he announced this. Was this just the influence of the Israeli lobby on him? Is he being blackmailed? Was this Jared Kushner up to his tricks? Or is there something else going on? We know that Trump likes to throw grenades in and see what comes out. If there's a situation which is intractable, he tends to throw a grenade in and see what comes out. I don't know the answer to that. Nobody that I know, nobody that I've spoken to particularly knows the answer to that. But this morning, this piece of news came out that Saudi Arabia describes Jerusalem decision as irresponsible and unjustified. And this is quite interesting because Saudi Arabia and Israel have been getting very, very close recently. And if this splits that sort of friendship which seems to be building there, then maybe that is the target of this particular move. I don't think we know the answer just yet, and we need to wait and see over the next couple of weeks what might transpire.
Well, that's absolutely true. My key question, Mike, would be in making these statements, is Theresa May working for the British nation, or is she actually acting for Israel itself? Because we have this huge problem with a massive pro-Israeli lobby in Westminster, the Conservative Friends of Israel. We've had David Cameron saying that his loyalty to Israel was unshakable. That to me means that the British people came second to his links to Israel. And we've had Theresa May standing up, of course, and saying that she is also absolutely for Israel. And we have a huge amount of Israeli money coming into the Conservative Party itself. So who is she speaking for? Is she speaking for the British people or Israel?
It's a good question because when I read the press release, I thought the statement was pretty soft. It took them a long time to produce that. So whereas normally she would be attacking Trump for everything that he does, in this case she hasn't.
Yeah.
She's been quite, well, as far as she's able to go, apparently she's been quite supportive of it. So it's a good question to ask. Now, another good question to ask is, where is Boris Johnson? So Stanley Johnson has now left the jungle. This, of course, is the rubbish reality TV program that he was taking part in recently. The name escapes me at the moment. For our foreign visitors, it's not worth trying to find out. But anyway, Boris Johnson's father was taking part in this reality TV show. He has now been thrown out of it, voted off. And he asked the question, because he's been out of the news, the agenda, as it were, he hasn't seen the news, is Boris still Foreign Secretary? Well, we were asking yesterday, where is Boris? Because, well, nobody was saying in the mainstream press. Now, we pointed out yesterday that, in fact, he had been in Brussels at the NATO foreign ministers meeting. Well, late yesterday afternoon, the Foreign Office did issue a statement, and he issued a statement. They issued a statement sort of reiterating what he had said before he went into the meeting. And he said, we'll be talking about promoting the security and integrity of Georgia in the face of the challenge from Russia and the territorial aggression of Russia. We're also looking at what NATO could do to tackle terrorism, particularly in the southern region. And that was it. So there's no mention of European defence in this. As we suspected, the reason that Boris's appearance in Brussels was pretty much not covered is because they, once again, do not want to acknowledge any European defence activity whatsoever. Well, apparently he's also not at the OSCE meeting, which is taking place today. This is all about growing tensions between Western and Eastern Europe. Well, foreign ministers gather in Vienna for this. And so I've paraphrased the subject of the meeting as those damned Russians, because that's basically what it's about. Now, the Russians are, of course, there. Sergei Lavrov, if you look closely at that image, is front and center. But Boris isn't. And I'm not really sure where he is today. You might have some information about that. So Alan Duncan is there instead. because apparently Boris doesn't want to get too close to the Russians at the moment. Maybe that's because of a Panorama program that came out recently, which is a bit woolly. Maybe it's about some other allegations that are a bit stronger than the BBC was prepared to present in Panorama, but he certainly doesn't want to be anywhere near Sergei Lavrov at the moment. Russia's aggression in Ukraine, anyway, appears to be the main subject for this meeting. It's apparently the biggest threat to European security. That's according to Rex Tillerson, who's also there. And so he and Lavrov are going to meet, and they're expected to discuss differences over sending United Nations peacekeepers to eastern Ukraine. They disagree over the mandate that the United Nations force would have. The US wants this UN force to be armed. The Kremlin says that it shouldn't be, and so there's a bit of discussion to go on there. Well, they're also talking about threats from Russia to NATO's eastern flank and so on. So this is all about Russia, well, we'll get more details later on as the meeting progresses and the press releases come out.
Indeed, Mike, perhaps we could ask our audience today whether they can help us by identifying exactly where Boris is. It's a bit like, where's Wally? Well, it's an appropriate term.
Yes.
Where is Boris? Can anybody actually tell us where he is at the moment? And of course, if you can see reports saying what he's up to, we'd love to know.
Speaking of Russia, Putin has decided to run again in 2018. So undoubtedly we will have him for another term in Russia. That's all I really want to say about that.
I would have thought so. Well, let's come back to the subject of the BBC. We've been reporting a lot on the BBC over the last couple of days, and it just gets better. So thank you very much to the lady who said, were we aware of this? And the answer was we weren't. So the Daily Post reporting that the BBC will create a pool of more than 140 local democracy reporters to cover council and public meetings for news organisations across the UK, including the Daily Post itself. And there'll be a total of 144 full-time and 2 part-time local democracy reporters. And they've been allocated to 58 news organisations in England, Scotland and Wales, following a competitive bidding process. So we were fascinated by this. If you research, you'll find that there were the first glimpses of this about a year ago, but let's have a look at the comments around this. We've got David Holdsworth here. He's shortly to leave the BBC, but at the moment he's BBC controller of the English regions. And what does he have to say? Well, he says this is a major advance in the partnership which will significantly improve the reporting on councils and public institutions, leading to greater public accountability for our local politicians. So this is all about a partnership, working together, getting those news teams to get even tighter in bed. But it's going to be good for us because we're going to get effectively better reporting on what councils and public bodies are doing, and it's going to hold the politicians to account. So, Mike, you've got a warm feeling at this stage, I would imagine.
Yeah, but it's running down my leg, Brian, because this is unbelievably dangerous. So what we have here is the removal of any kind of competition between media organisations. Yeah. We have local media, which has been decimated in recent years. Local newspapers bought up by 1 or 2 big organisations, and now we're going to get rid of all the local court reporters, all the local council reporters, and we're going to replace those with an outsourced agreement with the BBC. So there's only one voice. If we turn on the television, we get one voice, that's the BBC. We turn on the radio, we get one voice, it's the BBC. And now local reporting is going to be one voice, the BBC.
But worse than that, because it may appear that it's not one voice. You will be getting one voice through a different name, which is highly deceptive. So you could be listening to a local news station, which is not the BBC. Unbeknown to you, the news is the BBC. Well, let's bring in more personalities because they're the key to understanding this. We've got Ashley Highfield here, very high-flying man, chairman of the News Media Association. Previously, he was a director on the BBC board himself. So I think he spent 8 years with the BBC, but presumably he's now independent. He says the groundbreaking local news partnership between the NMA and the BBC is now becoming a reality which will benefit the BBC local media and, most importantly, local communities. It's all about us, Mike.
Yeah.
The initiative has moved the whole relationship between the BBC and the local media sector from confrontation to collaboration. And key benefits will include 150 new journalists on the ground holding public institutions to account on behalf of their readers. So it's the news media grouping up and collaborating, but don't worry, it's all for our benefit. Well, have a look at this man. This is obviously his Twitter page. You can see some of his previous jobs. He was with Microsoft, MD, Microsoft UK for a while. That's pretty interesting. That gets you into the big players. And there he was a board director with the BBC for 8 years. So let's put this together over the last few days. We've had the BBC basically coming in and setting up its BBC name has gone out of my head.
Reality check?
Reality check. Thank you very much, Mike. BBC reality check to check what the truth is. We've got the BBC coming into schools to teach children how they need to be watching the BBC. And then, of course, the BBC is running its own propaganda, as we showed with Brexit. So we're going to say there that the BBC is setting up its own truth and propaganda organisation. Now, let's put this lot into context, because 8 million from the licence payers' money is setting up this new partnership with News Media Association. They set up this local partnership, and we've already heard what's in that. We've got 700 media organisations signed up to it, 700. And what's going to be happening? Well, they're going to be setting up a shared data unit based at BBC Birmingham, and that's going to give local news providers access to BBC video and audio content, and it's going to be developing what they call data journalism expertise. So they're all working together, sharing BBC material. Why produce it yourself, Mike, if you can simply crib the BBC reports? And what have we got here? The pool of 144 part-time local democracy reporters. Straight out of 1984, that language, isn't it? Local democracy reporters. They produce stories that get fed back into that partnership scheme. And if we go on down, we've got 24 contracts issued to employ 55 titles for Trinity Mirror. So is this the BBC that you're now working with, watching, or is it Trinity Mirror? And the final bit at the bottom of your screen is that news organisations, radio stations, online media companies and established regional newspaper groups will receive funding from the BBC for employment costs of the reporters. So it's almost like the BBC is now starting to buy up commercial media.
I would like to know where in the BBC Charter it says that this type of commercial arrangement is permitted.
Well, they've apparently got a special bit in the Charter, Mike, which says that they are basically able to give this money. So I think they've preempted your question by changing the Charter to make this acceptable. I put a tag on that image, which was basically BBC tightens the noose around the neck of independent news reporting. That's absolutely true. But let's also remember that in the background, we've got the government that is running the largest applied behavioural psychology agenda, probably seen in the West. So this came out of this government's so-called nudge unit, but this was the government boasting in their document Mindspace that they could change the way people thought and behave by using applied psychology, and the public wouldn't even realise it's happening. So this is big society, and what do you need for big society? Well, you need a massive propaganda organisation. And we'll just give you this bit on the News Media Association. If you say, what is it? Well, this probably is about the best you're going to get, because it's the voice of national, regional and local news media organisations in the UK, a 5 billion sector, 48 million adults look at the material. But it says the NMA exists to promote the interests of news media publishers to government regulatory authorities industry bodies and other organisations whose work affects the industry. This is nothing about the viewer. This is about these organisations being able to get into the market and simply make more money.
Right, we'll move on to Brexit then. The Telegraph saying that Jean-Claude Juncker fears Theresa May's government will collapse next week without a Brexit deal. He's doing his best to make sure that that happens. He's claiming that there's now there was a 48-hour deadline, a new 48-hour deadline on agreement over the Northern Irish border. So he's given Theresa May to come up by tomorrow to come up with some kind of plan for that. There've been phone calls with the Irish Taoiseach. There've been discussions with the DUP. Not sure how much progress is actually being made there, but perhaps a bet on whether Theresa is going to go by Christmas. Maybe that's not so silly as it may once have appeared. It seems to be she can't just get herself established properly at all as a Prime Minister. It's a real shame. I'm sorry for her.
I think she's wobbling all over the place, but we have kept hearing those rumours about activity at ground level by particularly Labour Party activists, and they were being warned that there was going to be an election and they needed to start brushing off their posters and leaflets.
Yes. Now, yesterday I was suggesting that of course, post-Brexit, and that the Northern Irish border issue was being used to drive this. There was going to have to be some synchronisation between British law and EU law. Well, Chris Grayling was on BBC Radio 4 this morning, and he's decided to respond to that in some way, because what he said was, we don't have to have, and we've never said we will, and we don't want to have a situation where in future our laws are identical to the European Union. Well, I wasn't saying they were going to be identical. I was saying they were going to be kept in sync. So what he went on to say is plenty of countries have what you call regulatory equivalents, where in one country you have anti-money laundering law and have another in another country. So you've got one anti-money laundering law in one country, you have another anti-money laundering law in another country. They're not the same. They have a similar goal, and each recognises the integrity of the other to stamp out money laundering. There will be areas where we do things in a similar way. There will be areas where we don't do things in a similar way. That's all the Prime Minister was seeking to achieve, to make sure we can ensure trade flows as freely as possible across the borders. So that's kind of what is he saying? Is he saying laws are going to be kept in sync or not? I wasn't saying that the law is going to be identical in the sense of the identical wording. He seems to be implying that that's, of course he isn't responding to me directly, but that's not the point. The laws are going to be kept in sync afterwards. They have to be, because if we are working within the same framework for trade on both sides of the channel, then of course the laws have to be kept in sync.
Yeah, and lots of questions here, Mike, because of course the starting point is that law within the United Kingdom as common law and law on the continent is completely different. So there's all sorts of questions to be asked.
Absolutely. Now, European Council meeting today. This is the Justice and Home Affairs Council. Well, who's there from the UK? It's impossible to find out. I know there is somebody there from the UK because they've already voted on some of the agreements today, and they voted positively for those, but I'm not sure who actually is there to vote. The meeting is being chaired by the Estonian Minister for the Interior and the Estonian Minister for Justice. So I'm presuming the British Minister for the Interior, that's Amber Rudd, and the British Justice Secretary is over there at the moment. They are going to aim to reach general agreement on a draft EU LISA regulation, for example. This EU LISA is the European Agency for the operational management of large-scale IT systems in the area of freedom, security and justice. So we're looking at things like visas, the Schengen Agreement and that kind of thing. They're going to be informed of progress on the common European asylum system. Over lunch, they're going to exchange views on strengthening the Schengen area, but the main focus is on counter-terrorism. But Again, the British media not mentioning this meeting at all because they're also going to discuss cooperation between missions and operations which are part of the EU Common Security and Defence Policy and EU agencies in the justice and home affairs area. So it seems at the moment, Brian, every single meeting in the European Union, it doesn't matter what the actual subject is, in this case it's home affairs and justice, every single meeting of the European Council at the moment has some component which involves the common security and defence policy. It's clear that what the orientation of the European Union is at the moment, they're absolutely focused on this mission of European defence.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
With defence, we have integration of the police. This is the bit that many people in UK still don't understand. The danger of the integration of military with police, which we see on the continent, which we haven't quite got here. But of course, this is the push: militarised police.
Right. Interpol and Europol have been busy today. Starting with Interpol, one of the big industries of the day, of course, is people trafficking. And so international experts in human trafficking and migrant smuggling are meeting today for the Interpol Global Conference on trafficking in human beings and smuggling of migrants. It always fascinates me that they don't put the word stop or prevention or any kind of term like that in their titles. This is the Global Conference on Trafficking in Human Beings and Smuggling of Migrants. It's almost like an industry body or something.
I think that's exactly what it is, Mike. They're making money out of it. And the more people that are being trafficked, the more children there are, the more drugs, the more crime. And the thing is just a circle, self-fulfilling circle.
So this is a 2-day event hosted by Qatar, and it's gathered more than 300 experts from law enforcement, the public and private sectors, NGOs, and international organizations from 90 countries. Opening the conference, the Minister of Administrative Development, Labour and Social Affairs highlighted how Qatar is working to act at the local, regional and international level. Our collective efforts, however, he said, will not be successful unless we address the root causes of the phenomenon, whether they are cultural, economic, political, ideological or social. I think in fairness that's a very correct point, but of course there's so much profit being made out of this at the moment and so little effort, so little money being put into preventing it and stopping it, that really they're on a hiding to nothing. They've got to start trying to change policy to make sure that that there's a proper amount of money putting into prevention, rather than trying to get the police to do something about it with no budget. But in the meantime, before we get on to what Europol has been talking about, we'll just mention the fact that they're about to get a new head. Because Rob Wainwright, his term ends in May 2018. And so this lady, Catherine de Bolle from Belgium, has been put forward as the next executive director of Europol. Good luck to her. Maybe she'll do a better job than the last one. But today they are welcoming delegates to the conference. The conference is called Drugs in Europe, a bold law enforcement response. And they're saying that 24 billion euros in revenue is generated by the drugs trade each year. It's estimated that highly polycriminal organized crime groups are involved in this. 35% of organized crime groups active in the EU are involved in the production, trafficking and distribution of illegal drugs. 75% of those groups deal in more than one illegal drug. There's now 620 new substances on the market with the coming of synthetic drugs, including synthetic opiates. Again, this is a bold new law enforcement response. They haven't really said what that bold new law enforcement response actually is, but what it will be is vastly below what it needs to be in order to deal with the problem.
Yeah, usual situation.
Because again, tons of money being made by all and sundry.
Made in more than one way, created out of nothing and then used within the criminal cartels. Many people have been saying to the UK column, yes, but what do we do about things? And today I'd like to put up on screen the front page of the new Chartist Movement website. This is a result of a huge amount of work by a great many people that's been going on behind the scenes over quite a few months. It has had help from the British Constitution Group, but there is also now a very wide group of people coming together because they realise that the only solution to stopping what we are seeing, which is effectively massive criminality through not only the British government but other nation states, we require people to start working together from different backgrounds, faiths, colours, nationalities, in order to head in the right direction. Now, what is the right direction? We would say that there must be a proper system of law, and that law must, of course, protect the weakest in society. It must be fair, it must be just. So the exact opposite to the type of law that we're seeing Gavin Williamson push, where we're going to kill people on the say-so of the British government that they're a terrorist. There should be proper collection of evidence, there should be a proper trial, there should be a proper jury to make a judgment on whether or not people are guilty. So the system of law is very important. So is the constitution of any nation state, and we argue that nation states absolutely have the right to exist. So as we see the drive for the supranational states, the so-called corporatist globalist agenda, we believe that the nation state needs to be protected. But I encourage you to go to the new Chartist website there. There's already a great deal of information on it. There's a lot more to come. But the key point is that this provides a focal point for individuals and small groups, large groups, to start to come together to share information, expertise, and help in how they are already starting to counter what's going on or what we should be doing in the future. So I'm going to say a big thank you to Justin Walker from the British Constitution Group, and Eddie. Eddie in particular has done huge and very good work over many months, very difficult work to help bring people together and get them talking to each other. And of course, big thanks to Adrian and William, who've put this extremely smart website together. So there we are. Have a look at that. And if you like it and you like the message that's starting to come through the new Chartist movement, please share it with family and friends. It is spreading the word that is a key part of taking the action. And I'll end with a thank you to the person who sent us the somewhat risque Christmas card, which did also include a donation. It was appreciated. It did bring a smile to our face. And thank you to all the other people who've been buying pens for the UK column, taking out subscriptions, making donations. We have to keep saying it. To do what needs to be done, we can only do it across the board with your financial support. So thank you very much. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.